host, Nufatora, and this is the podcast where I discuss the best stories with the best minds in the community. On this episode, I'll be discussing a wide range of topics with 13 creatine colds. Thank you for joining me.
Hello there.
So, I'm curious, can you give us a little background on who 13 creatine colds is?
Oh, blimey. Um, I don't actually remember when I first started doing wedgie stories, but that's probably because I know that you're a member of the Lucky Fetish forums, and I never really got into that, but I was aware of it um back. I think it was like 2011, 2012, maybe when it first started.
Yeah.
Um, and a, I had a Deviant Art account back then, but I don't remember. I was probably a teenager at that point, in my mid 20s now, and I don't remember making any stories. But I was certainly doing something on DA back then. And I was only aware of Lucky Fetish through I don't even know what they were called. It was like Wedgie Girls back then with like Jess and Fox
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep. Yeah,
all
yeah.
that lot. Um, I was only aware of it through like I saw I think those were the first videos that kind of like got me into the fetish initially. Um, but I remember hanging around DA at some point back then, like 2011, 12. Um, just kind of lurking and like talking to random people in DMs.
Yeah.
Um, but it wasn't until I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago where I actually properly started writing stories under this account's name.
Okay.
And now I mean, busy as hell now.
Yeah.
Don't don't put out stuff consistently, but uh, I do a bit of stories. I do a bit of drawing, what I can anyway.
Yeah, welcome to the club. Yeah, and I think that's something that affects pretty much all writers who would like to do more. They're just so busy. Um, so, from coming from lurking 10, 11 years ago now, um, you're now at 438 watchers. What does it feel like
Blimey.
to know at least that many people are interested in what you have to produce?
Take a minute to think about it. Just give me the time. But hmm, I don't know. I mean, I never really think about it in terms of the number of people that are interested. I generally assume that there's, you know, a significant number of people that are into this fetish as a whole. So, I mean, I don't expect any particular number for my own stuff. Um, but it doesn't I don't want to come off as like being I don't even know what the word for it really is, but you know, I'm not expecting to have watchers, is what I'm getting at. But it doesn't surprise me that there's a fair number of people that are interested in it. You know,
Yeah, okay.
like if you can if you have a decent sense of being able to write like a coherent story, then I can understand people being interested in it. So
Yeah, that makes sense when you lay it out like that. Absolutely, I can get behind it. Okay.
I'm sure you've read some stories where like they have the same idea as you, but just
Uh-huh.
the writing's not coherent.
Yep. Yes. Well aware. So I guess you didn't really expect or think you would gain this big of an audience then.
No, I don't even think of it as big. To be honest, like I see some of the other people in the space that have tens of thousands, sometimes even like hundreds of thousands of people following them. I think that's a big number.
I
Few hundred, that's good, but like it's not big.
I
Not to me anyway.
I mean I mean that's fair, but it's I think of it also like you put almost 450 people in a room together. That's a lot of people. So even if it's not the thousands or tens of thousands or whatever, I think
This ain't
it's
just any normal room. This is an internet room.
I
You
mean
know?
that's true. That's true, but I don't know. I think it's still success in
Yeah.
some way.
No, I do understand where you're coming from. Like it is, I've garnered an audience that like what I put out, um, and that is nice. Like it's nice to know that like a decent amount of people like the kind of content that I'm producing. But you know, as I've said, I don't produce it with the expectation or want for gaining more people. I just make it because I enjoy making it. You know,
Yeah, yeah. And that I think that is just the best mindset to have when putting content out there is to make it because you want it and to make it for yourself. Like it's something you would want to consume. I think that's really important to have.
that very
Yeah.
that whole thing of like if you love what you do, then it's not work kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um,
Difficult to make money on something like that, but
people have people have monetized it, so it's very viable. And it seems like a lot of
okay,
people do tend to use um, this community as a sort of stepping stone to um, other kinds of writing.
yeah,
Are you much of a reader? Do you read stories usually?
I would say like if you're talking about non-wedgie stories, hmm,
Well, both.
I would say that I am not I'm not as much of a reader as I would like to be,
Okay.
uh, because I read a lot of different things. Um, I've, for instance, one of the last books I read uh, a few months ago was a book in which the story you have like I think it's like 12 short stories, and on one page it's English, and on one page it's in Spanish,
Jeez.
and it's like Spanish writers writing stories that have been translated by the people.
Okay.
They're just about any odd stuff, and it was bought for me by someone else. But like, I I like reading stuff like that. You know,
Mhm.
it I because I'm interested in like learning other languages, and then
Mhm.
I've read books about like Norse mythology, the Prose Edda. I don't know if you're aware of that,
No,
written by
no.
no. Yeah, so I'm interested in like a variety of things, but not like, like I have a book sitting in my bookshelf where it is a fictional story which I have yet to pick up and even start.
Mhm.
So I could be I want to get onto it, but like I haven't find my time put into other things, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I know writers like Anime Panties have said they've barely read anything at all. Um, so it's an interesting thing to look at, like how much what's already been written influences what is being written. Um,
There's definitely a variety. Like
mm,
I get the sense from you and especially from Hans that I mean, I'm assuming about you. I think Hans has made it quite apparent that they read quite a bit outside of stories, like wedgie
yeah.
stories. Um,
Yep.
and like you're getting a whole different uh all the writers that are in the community come from very different backgrounds in terms of how much they consume in
Mm-hmm.
terms of outside stories and how much that influences them. I certainly would say that I do read a lot of different wedgie stories within the community. I've been aware recently of how, especially since like going back and I said to you in DMs just before we started this, of how I went back and read the first story that I posted on this account.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was reading one of the more recent ones that I wrote. And it's a very like there's similarities in how I've written them, but it's still a stark difference because, and I'm very acutely aware of how stories that I've been reading recently have definitely influenced on how I've been writing recently.
Okay.
If I could be a little bit more specific about that, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
there's been a couple of particular writers that I think I've centered around recently in just reading their few stories and the the dynamics and the character interactions and the way that they're the personalities of their characters where some of them are very gullible uh uh very manipulatable, some of them are very in contrast to that, very dominating and very assertive.
Mm-hmm.
That has definitely fed into my stories recently where like originally going back and reading that first story, the characters were much more um they're just different from that, they
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to drag on about my own story, but
Please do.
the the very first one I did was the main character in it. There was a theme going with it where they would become they would disassociate once they got into a very particular situation. Up until that point, they had a very, their own unique personality. Whereas now, going forward in time and reading my stories now, it feels, or at least I noticed that my characters are much more like one dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that as like it's necessarily a bad thing, but I see what you're kind of getting at there, where like what you read and your sources of inspiration, what you're consuming is definitely feeding into your own creations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense. The things that you really enjoy, if you were to then pursue something in that area, then I think it automatically comes forth in your voice and style. I don't think it's something we can control even. So, why did you decide to start writing in the first place?
I think the thing that comes straight to mind is that the first story I put up in this account would be one that was based off of Darling a Knife, which was done by Hans Gutherson and Shadow Mulder.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a story which kind of aroused my interest, particularly because it, I probably should have seen this coming already, but like, the story was based in almost like Wild West
Mm-hmm.
setting,
Yep.
which was something that I'd not even considered being a setting for a wedgie story, which to me now seems like obvious. Like, uh, not even the specific setting, but like you can pick whatever setting you want. It can be
Right.
anything. But back then, when I first read that, I was like, holy shit, holy, you know,
Yep.
this is wow. Like, this is new to me. This is very interesting. And
Uh
like
huh.
I like the fact that you could use that setting and kind of base it around, like one of their first stories was about I think it's one of the main characters called June, and she's like trying to look for help in a small ranch town, and she ends up like hiring someone who's kind of like a bounty hunter to help her out, but she's a little bit drunk, and she ends up getting messed up badly in like a public humiliation display by one of the kind of antagonists who ends up becoming a main character as well. And but it was almost like this like a Mexican standoff
Mm-hmm.
where it's like the bounty hunter versus the antagonist, and they both went into like this um standoff with all the local townspeople watching, and just the fact that it's incorporating so many of those Wild West vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just really like that. I was like, that is something about that really attracted me to it,
Hmm.
and because of that, it inspired me. It immediately made me go like, I want to write something similar to this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I had a go at it, but it ended up becoming its own thing, partially because I think I wrote the first entry just in complete inspired by it, you know, really wanting to just get straight pen to paper kind of thing. And then straight once I published the first issue, I was like, I don't want to like step on their toes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in writing the first instance, I had started creating this kind of backstory for my own character that I incorporated into it. And so then I tried to like pivot into my own direction where I then removed Hands and Shadows characters and started taking it in my own direction, but within the
Nice.
same environment of this Wild West setting.
Right. Right.
Um,
Okay.
but to me, it was just that like, novelty of maybe it wasn't to other people, but that you
Mm-hmm.
could incorporate these kind of themes into your stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what inspired me to start.
That was that story for you. That I feel like that's it's the same thing for pretty much every writer. Like there's that story or a couple of stories that really shows them the light.
Mm.
To, um, it sort of opens the doors to in your mind as to the possibilities. Um, it's it's fascinating to see that from talking with so many different people. Um,
Do you remember what your first one was?
there's a couple of them. It's luckily unlucky. Um, Lucy and Daniela is the most obvious one. Feeling the fire until it burns. Sore winner. I got too many. I've read too many. I've read too many Lucky Fetish stories. There's so many that I had the pleasure of reading before I started myself in this community.
The
So
ones I've definitely heard you talk about before.
yeah, the ones that I feel everybody it's necessary for everybody to read. I feel like they are the classics of
Well,
our
consider me uncultured then, because I
community.
don't think I've read one of those
Oh
yet.
man,
Yet.
oh man, you gotta read them. So it's so worth it.
I still need to make an account on Lucky Fetish to do that.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth it to see.
It will happen.
Yeah, yeah, just to see where the community was at the time and um, uh, see what the some of the classics are that so many of us constantly hail. So as you've outlined, you really have made it no secret that your first story, The Limits of Her Mind, was inspired by Delia Knife by Hans and Shadow. the first chapter of their story was posted on January 11th, 2021, and the first part of your story was posted just over 2 months later. Uh, Was there anything else besides that Mexican standoff scene that grabbed you?
Hmm. I wouldn't pin it directly to the Mexican standoff as more towards the general setting in that you can have a story which can be in the setting of something like a Wild West movie
Yeah.
or you know a superhero movie or a in the future space travel movie as if it's like the alien movies. You could have a story within that setting. uh it was like an eye-opening moment when I first read that story, where suddenly I went like, oh, I could actually, like,
Mm-hmm.
I can write stories about whatever I want with, like, in these settings. Because it's weird because I finished uh that story with the limits of a mind, and I mean, I quote unquote finished it. I i ended it, and then I think I took a break for a while, quite a while. I mean, I've got university studies going on, so that kind of took up a bit of my time. But like, I'd found time to write in between with the limits of a mind, and then I finished it. Because especially towards the end of that story, I started to get to the point where I knew where I wanted to take it, but that I imagine you felt the experience where you have the initial conception for an idea and you're really excited to make it. And you start putting it down, you create the first edition, you create the second edition, you create the third edition, and then suddenly you're like, I know where I want to take this, but I just don't know how to get it there.
Oh, absolutely.
And
All the time.
and it suddenly becomes this like trial of, I feel like some of the stories that are between, you know, maybe the fourth or fifth edition towards the end are almost, they're not filler, but they're not how I would have wanted them to be. And that is fine. Every writer should still just, like, nothing has to be your end all be all best thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's much better to kind of put out like what you're able to produce at that time and then improve upon it over time
Yeah.
rather than be perfectionistic with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I ended up finishing that and then taking a break, and I think it was like probably about a year before I started actually writing again. And the thing that really drove me back to it was I was still lurking during that time that I was away, and the point that drew me back was when I started reading stories which were a bit more, they still had a setting to them, but
Mm-hmm.
they were much more of like free. They You didn't have anything holding you down. There was less limitations, because with the limits of her mind, I was kind of toying this fine line between, you know, there are parts of it which are based in reality, but then also parts which are too outlandish to be real.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that drove me back is that I was just throw away with the idea of it being based in reality.
Yeah.
Like, there's human beings, of course, but now now you can kind of like, don't feel held down. Just write what you want to write and go a
Mm-hmm.
bit crazy with it.
Yeah. And I'm kind of the mind where even if it's not, even if the story ends up somewhere you weren't picturing it originally going, I kind of just go with what I've put down and see where it takes me. Because you never know what you end up with when you reach the end could be a lot better than um, what you're originally envisioning.
Yeah, no, I would wholeheartedly agree, especially with my my mindset that like your thoughts are not really who you are. They're just things that pop into your head.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so if you're having, you know, like what you're saying, if you have a thought or a set of thoughts which end up taking your story in a direction you had no idea of it going in that direction, it's not really a representation of you. It's just kind of where your mind has happened to go at that particular point,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no reason not to explore that
Yeah.
because it might end up being something more interesting than what you had originally been envisioning.
Yeah. Absolutely. So looking back at your beginning, where were you in life when you first started writing on DA?
I think. I think back. What was it? It was about 2 years ago now. I started writing. Was it? When did you say that? Just the limits of a mind. The first edition was what year?
2021. It's the beginning of
2021.
last year.
Okay, it's still about 2 years ago then.
Yeah,
Wow.
just about.
Okay. So I probably would have been in the second semester of my first year at university. And if I think back, yeah, no, it's a weird time because uh, I think I wrote that first story in March, which was exactly when, at least in my country, the UK, um, that's when our first like, lockdowns happened. And it was also conveniently around the time that I broke up with my uh, long-term partner, and so it was a weird time because I just started uni. I had never, I think it had been like 5 or 6 years since I'd been in education, so that was a bit of um, a surprise of going back to it and getting back into the swing of things with that, and then suddenly being out of a relationship, which I think I'd been in for about 5 or 6 years. That was also a big change. And then suddenly lockdowns as well. So it's a lot of stuff going on at the same time. And I think I found a lot of respite in the process of just, you know, I, I actually quite, I remember um, when I was writing The Limits of Mind, uh, I would sit down with like just like a couple, maybe 2 or 3 shots of bourbon on over ice, and I would just sit. Once I'd finished all my studying for the day, it'd gone like 11 o'clock, and I'd just sit down, have a couple shots of bourbon, and just sit, write for a bit. It's my time to myself, time to relax, a bit therapeutic. Um, but it was all of those kind of culminating factors of different things, big changes in my life. And so I found a lot of enjoyment in that time to myself to just sit and let some thoughts flow out of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Re- Let the let the thoughts flow out of you as the booze flows in to take its place. Yeah. Yeah, you're definitely not alone in having a couple drinks while you're writing. It sounds like it was kind of like the perfect storm to uh, push you into writing, and it's kind of funny how it's that way for so many people. It's therapeutic, and it's uh, a way to get their thoughts out of their heads. It's kind of funny to me how across the community it's so it pop that the kind of thing pops up so often.
what would they call that? Homogeneous, right?
I'm honestly not sure.
Homogeneous, I think is the right word to pronounce it.
Possibly.
Um, just meaning that everyone's kind of very similar.
Right.
Um, but one thing I'm interested in, given that you've spoken to lots of people in the community, is in the same vein that like sitting down late at night, little bit booze is a nice way to relax and start writing. Some of the times that I've written or I've felt that I've written really well has been when I've woken up in like the early hours of the morning, maybe 3 or 4 a.m. and I haven't felt that I've been able to get back to sleep. And then I've just gotten up and I've kind of sat around and just whipped out the laptop and then just, I've been tossing and turning thinking about ideas. And I just start writing. And then before I know it, it's like 7, 8 a.m. I'm tired as shit. I try and fall back to sleep.
Nope.
But I end up with something that I feel is really good.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've also heard
Yeah.
of?
I think that's kind of common as well, and I have a kind of theory about it, and I wonder how much of it is due to the fact that like you've woken up and you've just been dreaming, and so your mind is still fresh from um, that wildly creative time and a super
Mm,
imaginative time. I'm wondering if you're sort of channeling that energy into
well,
writing.
I don't speak with any degree of certainty, but
Neither do I.
I'm studying psychology, and as such, I've listened to a lot of people talk about things such as sleep and how it affects you, and how when you're asleep, you kind of turn off this mode, which is like sort of like your logic. It's not the
Mm-hmm.
right term for it, but then when you first wake up, there is a period where it's kind of hazy. Where you're not quite, you're still kind of in that very fluid zone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to and what I'm kind
Yeah.
of alluding to as well. Uh, but it's something that I struggle to manifest uh, intently, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can't, I can't make myself wake up at 4 a.m. and then just do it. It just happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's not really the kind of writing that you really should try and replicate. You should I feel like it's much better to try and replicate the energy that you get from
Mm,
that time, and then be able to replicate it at a later time.
because otherwise it's not authentic.
Right. Um, yeah, but I'm at that point it is because you've been able to capture that feeling so well. Do you have any other inspirations besides Dilling a Knife?
I mean, I don't think I could pull all of the names of, out from like all the writers I've read from. If you gave me a chance to kind of look through my watches page, I definitely could.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
for instance, I would say there's one person that I would definitely like to mention because one of the like I haven't continued writing this yet. It's something that I've been putting off. Um, but I started writing a series recently, maybe a couple of months ago, maybe 2 or 3, with a user on DA called Madupalev. It was a Skyrim wedgie series, and I think people have done like one-offs before. I'm not sure if anyone's done like a full series yet, but they were doing like their own thing, um, with a universe. I think it's like a tabletop game that ended up becoming like an actual console or PC game called
Hmm.
Pathfinder,
Yep, yep, yep.
and they were writing a story based on characters within that,
Hmm.
as well as I think one OC that they'd made. And I was so infatuated with their writing style Like it was very much of that typical, you know, there were several characters which were just really nerdy and really gullible and really naive,
Mhm.
very typical kind of style. But the way that like I even saw Shadow Melder of all people commenting on some of their works, being like, "This is really good. This is really good. I'm really liking this." And I ended up talking to them, and we ended up starting a series where we created three of our own OCs as well as three separate OCs that were like the antagonists that were part of the Thalmor. I
Mhm.
assume that you've played Skyrim
Oh,
and like know
absolutely.
the Elder Scrolls. Yeah, so
Oh yeah.
um we were taking like um in-game storylines and then applying them to the characters where they were relevant so that you had this kind of degree of, it's based in something but with extra things tied on that are to do with wedgies that you wouldn't have, that weren't normally in the game, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I
Hmm.
really enjoyed writing that with them. Sadly, they ended up leaving DA and
Oh.
writing for their own reasons, but their style of writing definitely. I mean, as I kind of said before, there's so many people. I could say there's a lot of quite phenomenal writers in our community um, that really do shape and inspire a lot of other writers. But because I had that close relationship with them, where we were like back and forthing about ideas and writing things together, where we like, I think I'm not quite sure you how you've written stories with other people before, but you know,
Well,
we would do bits where I would write like dialogue for a few characters in a scene, send a message to them with it. They would respond back with their feedback, but then continue the dialogue as well. And just having that back and forth made it so much more of an engaging process
mhm.
compared to just sitting with a Word document or a Google
Yeah.
Docs document and
Yeah.
just trying to like put stuff out. There's not as much interaction.
Right.
Um, Go on.
The only time I've ever really worked with someone on a story was me writing it, and they helping me, I guess, edit along the way. Um,
Mm,
so I've never legitimately worked with someone to write a story.
that could just be your writing style, though. You might find it a bit interruptive to have someone else kind of inputting what they think that should be the next thing.
I don't know.
Imagine it doesn't suit everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I've never done it, so I don't know.
For me, it was really good. Like
Okay.
just having, because it's weird because then you get a story which you know we were trying to make our styles of writing similar, but then at the same time you still had those kind of like uh you could tell who was writing which sections slightly,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but that kind of added to it as a whole because then sometimes you get like these quirks that would pop up about like how this particular character would express themselves in a particular moment.
Hmm.
um and yeah, well, now I've put off continuing writing that series for a while now because I'm not quite sure how to continue it by myself.
Yeah.
Like trying to get into their mind state of like reading back their stories and being, how do I put my words into theirs?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a problem I've never really considered before. But something.
you've never
How do
you,
you?
you've never tried writing in the style of another writer.
No, no. That's. I'm sure it's a huge headache, but it's something I've never really considered doing before. So it's. I'm curious if you've found out any sort of tips to being able to do it.
No, like
Okay.
straight off the bat, no. I I'm still working on it, to be honest. But it's something that definitely that experience with writing with them made me start to think about you know could you read in the same sense that where this year I tried doing I got like a little drawing tablet where it's like not a screen but like a kinesthetic pad where you put a stylus over and you draw things on it.
Hmm.
Started doing some digital drawings on my DA account with that, and
Right.
you know you would look at, or at least I would, with that frame of mind of like trying to imitate another writer's style, I would then look at other artists' style and see if I couldn't imitate in my own drawings the same, because every person in their writing or their drawings or their music, they have this kind of, there's a sense of their personality in it in a way
Absolutely.
that's it's difficult to like put into words,
Yeah.
but you can try and imitate it. And it's something that I'd not really thought about doing before doing the collaborations with this person,
Hmm.
but definitely now I have. I think I spoke to another member of the community, Jeji.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know them.
Yep. Yep. Very
Um,
familiar.
uh, they had they had a very similar writing style to Madaplev, or at
Hmm.
least I felt it was. And so then I was looking at their writing and being like, can I imitate theirs as well?
Right.
Maybe that would feed into it a bit more.
Yeah.
But I haven't got anything yet to say like this is how you should go about doing it.
Okay.
Um, all I've been doing is just reading back their writing and trying to, where people say like if you sleep on a book long enough, eventually it will just get absorbed into your mind, kind of thing.
Yeah. 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 I sent you a link to a story that sounds very similar to what you were trying to accomplish. Just putting it's about a girl getting sucked into the world of Bloodborne, where wedgies are the damage and the health.
Oh, that sounds too good.
It's not that long, but it was done pretty well.
You're gonna make me make an account right now, aren't you?
Oh, you should have already. You should have. Ooh, there's so many classic stories on Lucky Fetish that you gotta read. Do
It's
you
gonna
do
happen.
do you do any other writing outside of wedgie stories?
Um, Other than for university, not really. No,
Okay. Okay.
I think if something just crops into mind, like this is years and years ago though. Like I think I was under 10. I used to write stories about just random stuff I was interested in. Um, like made up stuff, based on things that I'd seen in TV and such. Um, but that was God knows, my memory beyond say, dare I say, even like 14 or 16 is gone.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess then as a reader, what do you truly love seeing in writing?
The thing that comes straight to mind is being able to get a sense of there being like when I read a story, I want the the dialogue in particular to really, especially when there's more than one person in the room, um, to really convey like the idea of multiple people almost being around you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I personally find that quite hard to do, and I think that's why I appreciate it a lot in stories that I read, even when they're really short ones. If you can give the sense of, you're so immersed in the story that you feel like you can almost feel and sense the people around you having their interaction, that they are like individuals. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're distinct from one another, and they're unique, and they have their own particular way of interacting with one another, and it really immerses you in
Mm-hmm.
that. That's what I really like about them, uh, about stories. Um, but to maybe take it a little bit further, because, for instance, one of the subjects that I took when I was at college was to do with what's it called, ancient Greek mythology,
Mm-hmm.
and so we studied a lot of um, Homer's poems, and I've done a bit of reading about other mythologies outside of that, and I always liked about those where you end up getting a sense of, you know, these really elaborate, um, out of this world ideas, these crazy monsters, these valiant heroes that you get. They're not supposed to be taken on the surface of like, this is exactly how it happened. It is more supposed to be, this is a representation of values or beliefs
Mm-hmm.
that we, the person who wrote it, felt that you might want to consider
Yeah.
and incorporate into your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And that in putting it into these elaborate and interesting stories, it makes it easier to remember rather than it just being boring old, you know, you should live your life this way and do it this way and
Yeah.
do blah, blah, blah. You know, here's like some crazy creature and some person fighting it and like struggling and having their own personal defects get in the way of being able to defeat it until they realize they need to overcome this thing. That's what, like, that and being able to sense the personality in the characters through the writing.
Mm-hmm.
I really love those.
Yeah. 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 So being able to feel that the world is alive and having something to look into the story in direct detail. That's that's what it sounds like you're really drawn to, and that's something I wholeheartedly advocate for.
Mm.
Is there anything that you'd like to see more of?
I think the thing that comes straight to mind is that I would like to see more um, support circles for people within these communities. Um, but it's a very thin line, and also um, I think because I don't participate in, like, I don't manifest the change in the world that I want to see, so to speak. Uh, that that may already be the case. That there are those. I just don't. I'm not in them. Um, but in my experience, I've seen a lot of like talented people within our the wedgie community. We kind of just up and go, um, and usually with some kind of message accompanying the disappearance of mental health reasons, or it just like this fetish not aligning with how they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, without much explanation, it's a thin line. I What I mean by that is, you know, it can be negative for some people,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I also think that you need to be able to have the open discussion with people to be able to work out whether it is or not,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it's just the way that you're going about it that ends up being negative for you.
Yeah.
And often, like, I don't often, I mean, obviously, it's the internet, you're talking to random people, you know, most of the time we're anonymous. And so it's not really like you're going to be confiding. your deepest feelings and like your insecurities and things with other people. But I do think it would help to have more openness with that side of things within our community specifically because of how many people I see just disappear because they don't seem to be getting the support that they need.
Yeah, yeah, that's something I've definitely noticed as well. Um, I guess something that can help is just to reach out to people and talk, just to strike up a conversation, um, and, like show people that you're actually here for more than just the content. And you actually enjoy what the person has to say, and it's a tough thing to figure out how to handle, but um, I think people just need to start actually communicating more rather than just using this as a way to get off and then leaving. Because I think this can be so much more than just a way to get off. I think it can be a legitimate community, and we've shown that before. And I think it's a, I think it's good to have the. I guess what I'm trying to get at is like all these groups and like on DA and things like that. I guess they just need to be a little more open, as you said. Are there any aspects of writing that you really dislike, like trends, cliches, tropes, that sort of thing?
Get me started. Are there any tropes that you don't like?
Well, I mean, women only giggling. That's the only laugh that they can have. It's
Giggling. Yeah,
it's
that's a
tough.
good point. It's a good point. Um,
It's tough to say now because there's so many different writers and people uh, participating in that aspect of the community. And so the tropes and things that I really disliked before kind of are washed out by the variety of everything that comes out.
you don't have to read the stories which you don't like because there's plenty of other ones that you do like that you can read.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of them have also just kind of faded away because we've gotten better overall. The giggling thing is still a problem that I've noticed, but
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does come to mind that I don't necessarily think that these things have like faded away entirely. They just exist in smaller circles, which you might not see.
mm-hmm.
Because, like, when you ask that question, the immediate thing that came to mind is just stuff that I wouldn't necessarily consider things that I'm interested in, but I know that other people are. Um, you know, like certain other fetishes that don't appeal to me. Uh, like
Yeah,
for instance, um, I had someone talk to me before about writing a story which involved something called like pink bellying,
yep,
and like fair play to you, whatever. Everyone's into their own thing, but like I before they even said it, I'd never even heard of it,
mm-hmm.
and but like what that reinforces to me is like there is always um corners of people just out interested in their own things, but there's also like cross pollination where there's going to be people that are into that and other things, and then also wedgies, and so it kind of crosses over into a universe in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I guess if you're talking about like specific things, like um, I think your concept of like women only giggling just generally feeds into this idea of people like characters being too simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like there's a there's another I don't know if you'd even I guess it's a fetish called bimbofication. You know that one?
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, so it's basically where a woman, if you will, um, goes from being an ordinary person to someone that's just like pouty lips and big breasts and like always interested in doing sexual things, and it's very like simplistic of um it's supposed to be like a transformation thing where whatever, you know, they walk through a portal, they get injected with something, you know, something happens, and then suddenly this person suddenly starts becoming quote unquote a bimbo, right? Um, I think that kind of feeds into that idea of the only being able to giggle. Like if you make your characters too simplistic in that way where they don't have room to grow, that kind of puts me off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like even the stories that I've been writing recently, my own ones, where like I was saying before, I came back with more of a mindset of just write whatever you want, you know, just
Mm-hmm.
get it out, just like go crazy,
Yeah.
do mad stuff. And so I took on like a superhero setting where the main character is a woman that uh, her ability, her powers are that she can dish out really powerful wedgies.
Mm-hmm.
But the flip side is that the thing that gives her her powers is that she wears a pair of underwear that give her those abilities. But if she gets wedgied or embarrassed, her powers begin to dwindle.
Mm.
And so it's like this fight of being able to dish out, but then also not being able to receive what you're giving.
Yeah, yeah.
And the idea that I have going forward with that story is that, you know, I have these moments where, um, in one of the most recent ones, um, she is going to meet a friend out of costume, someone who doesn't know her superhero identity, and she ends up bumping into this very nerdy schoolgirl in the park who's getting bullied by some cheerleader characters, right? And she tries to intervene, but then suddenly realizes, oh, wait a minute, you know, I can't expose myself as being a superhero because that would give away my identity. And so she then ends up being overpowered by these two cheerleaders who let the nerdy girl escape in place of embarrassing her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is going forward that this superhero character is going to start considering she's basically going to have a character arc of can I begin to accept, you know, the embarrassment, accept that there's a bit of me which just kind of views being embarrassed as a bit of me, emblematic of, at least in my personal experience, like the interest of being interested in wedgies themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you, I know in my experience, there's a certain degree of embarrassment about viewing it as a part of yourself.
Yeah.
And so I felt that having the character in my story sort of see them and start to try and accept them as being part of herself, be able to accept it would then allow her to begin to be empowered by them instead. And so eventually, if she manages to overcome her own mental hurdles, she's going to get to a point where she's actually going to be powered up by them, kind of
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
Um, it's all very, you know, silly, but at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, I felt that it's kind of um, a representation of how I thought about them as a concept and in relation to myself,
Mm-hmm.
um, but also allows for there to be more depth to the character in that it's not just, this wimpy person that's just going to get abused by every single villain that they encounter, but that eventually, through their own trials and tribulations, they're going to get to a point where they're able to grow and develop
Mm-hmm.
and become more of a fully fledged person.
Yeah.
If you
Very
don't
interesting.
have that, I'm gonna get bored of it eventually.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I did think of another thing that I think still goes on, but it's annoying as hell to me, is when characters, in order to describe the character, the writer just has them stand in front of a mirror or check themselves out in some way, and they shake their ass for themselves and things like it's
Yep.
I hate that so much. It's such a
Yeah.
lazy way of writing the character, getting the description, and it's
I
all
mean,
it's all direct detail that can be put into indirect.
that's a really good point because that's actually something I'd forgotten that I struggle with this, but for the, I can't remember how many stories, but for quite a few stories now, I've been completely deliberately ignoring to include any details about what the character actually looks like
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to take it out of the like I don't want to input some kind of segment where it's like, they're looking in a mirror or
Right.
some other characters looking at them and describing what they look like. Like I
Yeah.
don't want to take it out of that. I just want to get on with the story,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening.
Yeah.
Um, but then it ends up just being that like half of my characters have no description of what they look like whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are ways of inserting that description into the action and what's going on. There's like if you have a character interact with a piece of their clothing or something, you throw in a tiny little descriptor of what they're doing. Like there's ways to do it so that you give readers just enough,
mm,
just that little bit, and then they can fill in the rest.
mm, no, definitely. I mean, I think I just haven't found the right way to do it for these few stories, but uh,
Mm-hmm.
at least for one of them in particular, I can think of. One of them, I tried out doing one of those POV style stories,
Mm-hmm.
and the decision to not include any details about the you character was even more deliberate in that one, which I mentioned in the description because partially because I didn't know how to incorporate it properly where it felt fitting. But at the same time, I was also looking at it and going, well, actually, in a story where the character I'm writing is quote unquote you, it might be quite good to leave personally identifiable details out
Mm-hmm.
whilst also being very descriptive of the environment and the other character, such that then when you read it, you can fill in your own details
Yep.
so that it fits your idea of you or the person that you want it to be.
Yeah, that's entirely
Because
true. I mean,
I
that's
felt that it was fitting for that style of POV story, at least.
definitely. Yeah, I feel like that's the only way it would really work if you're trying to sell it as the reader is doing it. Then you really have to leave the character as broad as possible. You can't really describe them in any sort of way.
Mm.
So what
You
is
can
it?
just fill in the blanks with overly describing the other characters in the environment.
Yeah.
Because that way they feel immersed. They
Mm-hmm.
just have to fill it in with their mind.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at. Like there are times when having no description whatsoever is a strength, as opposed to normally people think of it as a weakness.
Mm.
I guess that's something to look out for another rating as well. Then, what do you believe sets you apart from the rest of the content creators out there?
Same thing that separates all of us out from one another. That like
Okay.
we may come from, there may be some similarities in our writing style or our backgrounds or blah blah blah, but each of us is our own individual person with our own set of previous interactions and previous life experiences and previous writing experience, etc. You know, everyone's coming with a different basket of fruit, and it produces just whether it's minutely or massively different styles of writing or content. I would say that like I couldn't specify between. If you gave me a specific user, I would be able to go like, "Oh, here's the specific ways that I'm different from this person."
Mhm.
But even then, I don't know their history and backstory and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
I think it is just that every person is individual in quite in unmeasurable ways, almost, um, and that contributes to their creative process. So that you may still find a lot of similarities, but
Mhm.
and this is where where I was saying before about trying to imitate another person's writing style, until you have the depth of understanding of how to write, you don't know how to do that because you're not that person.
Mhm. Very well said. Uh, I definitely was not expecting you to say that. Okay. I think it's very fair to think of it in that way. I think it's healthy sometimes to think of like what what the standout traits for yourself for what for you. Yeah. So I guess
What are standout traits that you've heard from other people then?
like how they would describe themselves.
As being different from other
Yeah.
creators in the space.
Honestly, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I know there have been some, but
It's not an easy question to answer, is it?
yeah. Well, that's also just
Mm-hmm.
my memory is not the greatest. So
Yeah.
I know people have said some before, but none come to mind.
Mm. Yeah, my memory's just as bad, I would imagine. Far more topics.
Okay. What are you hoping to accomplish by writing and creating art?
uh, I would like to get better at doing it. And by better, I mean enjoy the stuff that I make more than I did the last stuff that I made. Yeah, as I kind of inferred to before, it's more just about I get enjoyment out of making, whether it's writing or drawing it. Um, it's just expressing stuff that I'm feeling and
Mm-hmm.
brings me a whole different slew of emotions. But if I was to categorize it as a whole, it's just enjoyment. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really what I aim to get out of it, just to keep when I feel like it. Um, I value the people that do this as their living, but I don't
Yeah.
want to do this as my living. I just want to do this because I enjoy it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's nice to do this in my spare time and see myself kind of improve in certain ways.
Interesting. You really just enjoy writing as a hobby. You have no dreams to take it any further.
No,
Wow. Okay. That is very different than a lot of people that I've talked to. That's so interesting. So, what about maintaining the balance between creating an art and writing? Is there anything there that um, is there anything that you can talk about there?
um, especially when you're starting to learn how to do art, like just the basics of like how does this art application function? What are the
Mm-hmm.
different uh, shortcuts that you can use, etc. Um, it takes a long time just
Mm-hmm.
creating the most basic like 2D art with no shading whatsoever. It takes days just to create one piece, and that's like, especially when you get these scenes. Like I've done a couple where it's like multiple different, it's like here's this one thing that the character does where the character says hello or something equivalent in one shot, and then there's another shot next to it, um, of like them actually like giving the wedgie or starting the wedgie, and then it goes on, and there's like 4 or 5 scenes. That that takes so long to make when you don't know how to do it efficiently. Um, that I I definitely noticed that like when I first started doing the drawings, um, it started taking up far more time than I was actually spending writing. And then one of the things I started doing to combat that was I was incorporating very, very short stories into the drawings I was doing and putting them in descriptions. Um, but ultimately, um, I ended up just like, as I've kind of said before, whatever I felt like doing, whatever I felt I would get the most enjoyment out of, I would do that first. Um, because I was becoming aware of, I was spending time just working on drawings because I felt that I needed to finish it as opposed to feeling like I wanted to. Um, and I never really felt like that with stories because it was always that kind of thing of like you get the flood of inspiration and you just spend like 7 hours just chat typing away at it until it's done, and then you
Hmm.
go over it repeatedly until it's kind of refined a bit. Because I mean that's how I write. I'm kind of a person that will spew out everything, and then I go back over it, revise it, read back through it, and take out all the bits where I've messed up and does it sound right, etc.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but I'd say if you're doing drawing and writing at the same time, it can get a bit overwhelming.
Yeah,
Um,
I can imagine.
Particularly as someone beginning it. I have so many things in the backlog
Hmm.
uh, that I will get to, but uni is taking priority at the minute.
Yeah. It's interesting that you go through so many times in editing and revising. I don't do either of those things. I do it as I go along. Like my
Hmm.
editing and revising process is happening while I'm writing.
I've heard of people doing that, like it's out their uni assignments instead. But like yeah, no, I mean it's each to their own really. My process has generally been to throw everything out of my mind onto the page and then go
Hmm.
back through it. Because if I get so caught up in editing as I go through, I end up taking far longer than I would to get it all out.
Hmm.
Because I have the general structure and idea in my head for the whole thing. I just need to kind of get it out onto the page before I can work through it.
So walk me through your creative process for writing and making art.
Generally, I would say when it comes to writing, end up having an idea at first, and the ideas possibly based on it might have been based on things that I've read, but it can also just be based on um like if I can give you a solid example, I had a story in mind to write for Halloween that I didn't end up getting done because of just lack of time to commit to it. Though I do intend on doing it for next Halloween. Um, because that gives me plenty of time to work on it. Essentially, there was an old animation by someone who I think they're called like Pink and Peachy.
Yeah.
Um, they did like a series called Red Lace and various other things, but they did one like one-off animation many years ago. I don't remember the exact date, but it was like a haunted mansion with two girls, one recording the other, Heather and I can't remember the other girl's name. But they end up going through this mansion, and then there's like some ghost of a lady in there. Essentially, I was thinking of this, and I was thinking of like I want to create a story, Halloween, so it needs to be Halloween themed, and I was thinking of that story, and then going, how can I adapt this to make it my own? Um, and generally, uh, well, specifically regarding that story, but then this applies to other ones. I end up having like a beginning of the story comes to me first. I also know how I want it to end, and I fill in the blanks from there. And
Mm-hmm.
the filling in the blanks process comes in from when I actually sit down and start writing it, because I'll start building, you know, little connections, like bridges between the start and the end. Like, what are significant key moments that can happen between the start and the end that will take us from the start to the end of it?
Mm-hmm.
And with those bridges in mind, as long as I have set ones that feel like they fluidly lead into each other until we get to the end, then I can just fill in the blanks with dialogue and such.
Mm-hmm.
And that all comes very naturally once I have those bridges set up.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it really comes down to just I need some inspiration first. Kind of what's the general theme of this story going to be? What's the start and the end? Then what are going to be the connection points between the start and the end? How do we get from the beginning to there? Everything else just comes naturally. And I would say the same happens when I do um, a drawing, because generally I like I like doing like a single frame drawing, but I really like the ones where it's like a comic style. We have like multiple panels.
Has your style changed at all since you first started?
I imagine in small ways. Um, for instance, I never used to include drawings in my writing, whereas some of my more recent stories have actually had like drawings incorporated within the stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in terms of the actual process, um, I, yeah, no, I guess so. Just in, I guess where it's differed more has been, like my more recent superhero story has had a, like additions which don't necessarily I will come up with an addition. I'll have an idea for an episode um that doesn't straight away add to the the, the direction to the end. So it's just like I have inspiration for a random story that doesn't really relate to the general plot, but then I will um craft certain aspects of it to then feed into it in some way, or I'll just make the plot influence it that way. But I never used to do that. I
Yeah.
used to have a very strict, we're starting here, we're ending there. Everything in between is to do with the start and the end. Whereas
Right.
now it's kind of, I have an idea for the end. I've started it, but then I also just every now and then have an idea that this is too good to pass up on. Find a way to make it fit.
Mm-hmm. So you're much more open with your outlines, much more fluid.
Hmm.
I think that's really good.
Yeah.
I think it's good, very good to be open to new ideas in case something comes along that is, like you said, it's just too good to pass up.
And like you said way earlier, sometimes you have ideas that you weren't really thinking of initially, but may end up turning out to be better than what you were originally imagining.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Do you struggle with anything in the community?
Struggle in what sense? Like things that I think are problematic, or
um, I guess really in any sort of sense of the word you want to take it. What comes to mind when you hear that?
um, probably people sexualizing underage characters, because it often happens. Like wedgies get incorporated in TV shows
Mm-hmm.
with that are aimed for children.
Yeah.
I guess it's something that like people in this community have to deal with as well. It kind of filters into that thing that I'm talking about earlier about um, how do you incorporate wedgies into you as an individual as you get older as well, because it's all fun and games when you're quote unquote young, but um, once you start to get a bit older, it begins to be less of a like a cute thing that you do with other young people, and begins to be like a thing that feels a bit weird, but it should always just be it's fine as long as it's between two consenting adults.
Yeah. Do you struggle with anything about like creating your work?
As long as I'm not making it seem like a job for me, um, no, no, because I try and make it always be like I don't force myself to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have the motivation for it, if I don't have the inspiration, I don't have that fresh story idea in mind that I've been thinking about. That's like, I like for instance, I forgot like I ran out of time to do this Halloween one. I'm not gonna hate myself over it. I'm just gonna be like, well, I'll do it for next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that gives me plenty of time. Um, I wasn't gonna force myself to write at the end of every day after all my studying and then work and so on.
Mm-hmm.
To it wouldn't be fun for me then.
Yeah.
So I don't think I really.
Okay. Yeah, that's entirely fair. Um, is there anything that you're proud of so far with your catalog?
No.
Really? Nothing. You're not
Quite
proud of
frankly,
anything.
no, no.
Okay.
And
Wow.
I would say I would add on to that is simply because uh, this is still a private part of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess the private part really doesn't isn't really relevant. It's more just that I still feel like I'm feeling out what's uh, the good stuff. I haven't got there yet.
Mm-hmm.
The stories I've written, I would say, in my own opinion, are more, like smart as opposed to like a quality story, if you
Hmm.
will.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's just my own opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I may end up getting there one day where I write something because I do like like some of my stories have themes underlying them that I would say are uh, representative of a story that I would like to tell, but overlaid with wedgies and so on that then bring them down a bit because I'm then focused more on delivering. You know, the story has to incorporate wedgies because if it doesn't, then it's not like that's what I'm making it for. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I've yet to find the right balance. I'm
Okay.
getting
Well, it sounds like something you struggle with.
at.
Hmm.
I don't really, it don't lose sleep over it. So I
Right.
wouldn't say I struggle with it.
I.
But
It,
you are right in that I struggle to find the balance.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure you'll create something that you're proud of at some point in the future. So, looking at the community as a whole, where do you think we can go from where we're at now? And where do you predict we'll be in 5 years?
Probably writing stories about the new Pokemon game. Probably. Oh, yeah. No, I don't know exactly where it will be because 5 years ago, if I think about it now, yeah, I would have had no idea how to predict where it's going to be now, and
Yeah.
also all the different ways that the community may filter off into like different their own sub communities.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It goes so many different ways.
Yeah.
I really have no idea other than continuing to write stories, but just about what current media, adapting current media to fit their own stories.
Yeah.
Like I'm still seeing stuff come out now about, like I mentioned, the Pokemon. Like, I'm seeing ones come out about Scarlet and Violet characters.
Really? That fast? Wow.
Yeah, yeah, already. I know,
Jeez.
on it.
Okay. Yeah, it's a tough thing to answer because it could go any possible way.
I mean, I've never been a type of person to be able to predict where my, like, outside of wedgie stuff. Like, if whenever people ask me, 5 years from now, where do you see yourself? I have no fucking clue.
Yeah, and it's entirely fair to think that way because it's coming up with plans like that is and trying to figure things out like that is pretty difficult to do.
But small stuff, but not on big scale.
Right. Do you have any kind of message or anything you'd like to say to the community?
Just look out for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about?
I was interested
Mm-hmm.
in your opinion on, so JR works with the Wedgie Girls Patreon.
Yeah.
Do you think there are any ways that they could improve the Patreon from where it
Mm.
is currently?
I feel like it
I know
needs.
this is separate from.
It's fine. Um, I feel like the cast of models that's used needs to be focused in. It needs to be tightened a little. There seems to be a lot of new models constantly coming on. It's a little disorienting. Um,
Mm,
I don't, there's not really much I could think of to do differently because I don't think I'd be doing. I don't know if I can think of anything to do better because it does uh, work to so many tastes.
mm,
So I
mm.
feel like any change that I would make would tailor it more so towards my taste.
I'd definitely be interested to see um, what kind of demographic comparison we could get from, like, I know that Hans does the, like, yearly demographic survey on
Hmm.
here on DA. What that compares to the people that are on their Patreon.
Yeah, I can't
Like, is there
imagine it's
any
too
kind of
different.
differences? Mm.
Don't know how many of them would be willing to fill out a survey like that.
Well, I mean, what's more identifiable, Google Docs survey or your credit card information?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it is held on a private server though. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, supposedly. Do you have any?
Other than that,
Do you
no,
okay? Do you have anything you'd like to promote?
no,
Okay.
no. As I said, I'm not here to promote anything, just
Hmm.
for the enjoyment of it.
Yeah.
Had
Okay,
a good
that's
time chatting to you.
yeah. I did as well. Well, all right. There ends a wonderful discussion with 13 Creatine Colds, a unique perspective, well deservedly gaining an audience in our community. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. If there are any topics, stories, ideas, etc., that you'd like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as New Fatora. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.